Hello, welcome to A Game for Your Thoughts. Today we're talking about Star Wars Fallen Jedi Order. Star Wars Fallen Order Jedi. Gosh damn it, hang on. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. So, Fallen Order follows Jedi in hiding, Archer from Riverdale, as he is forced from his life of hiding to go on an adventure to restore the Jedi back to their former glory. Along the way, he has to avoid the Jedi killers known as the Inquisitors, and of course, make some friends along the way. The story of Fallen Order does a great job of setting the scene. It doesn't waste the time throwing you into the action. It gives you an idea of where Cal came from and what his current position is before everything kicks into gear and he begins his journey. I liked that I wasn't sitting there getting this whole character's backstory for like 9 hours before the game starts. Instead, over the course of the game, you learn about the trials that Cal faced during Order 66 and the events that followed. The characters that he meets along the way only add to the story. Former Jedi Seer in particular, her connection with the adventure helps her make like she feels like she belongs and there isn't just some character there that's along for the ride, like someone else in the game. But her moments with Cal are fantastic as they both survived the same horrible event but had very different experiences in the sacrifice they had to make to survive. Those were some of the best moments in the entire game. As you journey from planet to planet, you slowly check off boxes on the treasure hunt that takes up the course of the entire game. This wasn't bad as it kept the goal simple with lots of time to build up the main characters and help the player learn more about their pasts. It easily could have gotten swept up in creating a grand scale adventure that has too many twists and turns, but it kept a good natural flow to the story that felt focused and did what it needed to. On top of having a simple goal with interesting main characters, there was lots of cool set piece moments that were cinematic and just enjoyable to experience. In terms of the overall game, this was the strongest part of the whole experience. It had its moments that were really cool and never felt like it dragged on in terms of what was going on. My biggest complaint though was that there weren't many very strong side characters. Cal and Cia were easily the best and most important ones. If no one else was along for the journey, I don't really think it would have been any different of an experience. If anything, I think it would have been better for their friendship and the bond that they share. There have been more moments for them to sit down and talk about being Jedi and how about they go about their futures. Things like that. I understand that the role of the pilot Greaves, but he really didn't do much else except for fly the ship and complain the whole time. Then near the end, they introduce a character that could have been really cool, but they literally introduce her at the very end of the game, and that's it, so there really doesn't matter. The gameplay is like if you poured Tomb Raider, Sekiro, Metroid, and Star Wars into a blender and hit puree. It was an interesting combo that I was very intrigued by. Those are 3 of my favorite styles of games combined into one, so there was lots of potential for some fun gameplay. And potential is the key word, so let me explain. One of the joys of Tomb Raider is exploring the world, finding cool treasures, and exploring locations. One of the best things of Sekiro was the slick, parry-based combat that really tested your ability to learn and adapt to new situations. One of the best things about Metroid is coming across something you don't have access to, then gaining the ability to access said spot, going back and exploring to find cool new upgrades for your weapons or progressing further into the world. Fallen Order does all of these things, every single one of them, and let me explain why this was only sometimes awesome, because this is a great combo. It has everything that I would love in an action-adventure game. So let's start with the exploration. Tomb Raider's exploration is based around climbing on stuff, solving puzzles, and finding old artifacts that build the world around you. Tomb Raider does this well as it balances the 3 where one doesn't feel boring or repetitive. It mixes up the climbing sections by creating action sequences where you climb to save for your life. It creates puzzles that make you think about what objects are around you and how you will use them together to find the solution. And finding old artifacts gives you little blurbs about where the artifact came from and what sort of connection that adds to the grander adventure. Fallen Order does all of these things as well, and does them in very similar ways. You climb on stuff to get away from things, you solve puzzles using environmental objects, and you find things called Force Echoes which build the story and world around you. Nothing wrong here. It's not new or groundbreaking, but it does make room for some fun exploration. With exploration in mind, Fallen Order does something that I really did not care for. Instead of going out of your way to find upgrade parts or skill points like Tomb Raider does, you find ponchos, paint jobs, and lightsaber parts. You may be thinking that sounds kind of boring, because it is. The lightsaber stuff is cool, I will give them that. If it was only lightsaber parts, I might have been a little bit more willing to go out of my way to find boxes of goods. Cosmetics are cool and all, but when that's most of what you find, it's kind of hard to care. I really didn't care to change the color of my ship because you were never really near the ship, and changing your poncho color was lame because I never wore the poncho because I didn't like the way it looked. So it really didn't matter. If I was finding cool lightsaber parts, different outfits like Jedi robes where you can pull the hood up, or like pieces of armor, or even bundles of experience points to use for upgrades, if it was more stuff like that, I would have felt more motivated and inspired to go out of my way. By the end, I would really only open the crates if they were in my immediate path. This was a bummer too, because finding the crates usually had a fun puzzle or a tougher enemy to fight. If the rewards had been a little bit more tangible, this would have vastly improved the experience of going out of your way to explore the world. With this in mind, the Metroid element of coming across unpassable locations and finding the upgrade later left me uninspired to return to previous locations because I didn't care to find another poncho color. The upgrades you obtain are cool, as they're usually tied together with a cool character moment where Cal reflects on his time as a Padawan with his master. I did think these were great ways to obtain new abilities, as they had story implications as well. But now let's chat about the combat. This seems cliche, but I love Soulsborne games. I've beaten Sekiro and Bloodborne countless times, so this area of the game felt very familiar. Taking down stormtroopers wasn't always easy, as timing your blocks and being able to control groups of enemies became the game's toughest challenges. As you progress, you gain new components and abilities to add to your arsenal, which seemed cool, but when you think about it, was a red flag when creating combat that is meant to be skill-based. One of the things that makes the combat in Sekiro so amazing is that upgrades and abilities help you succeed, but it really comes down to the player's ability to learn the patterns of bosses, and more than anything, learn to parry and work around what the enemy's stamina meter is, while also keeping your own stamina meter in mind. Fallen Order has these elements. Bosses are largely based around blocking and learning patterns, but it rarely felt like I was learning and growing in terms of the combat. I was mostly thinking about what ability could I use to stagger them, or slow down time so I can move behind and wail on them from behind where their stamina meter doesn't really matter. Things like that made this combat seem less skillful and more around what abilities do I need to make things easier. This would have been fine, but it puts a large emphasis on parrying and working around the stamina meter. At first, I was having so much fun taking down the basic enemies and using everything that I'd used while playing Sekiro, until I realized that Fallen Order was trying to do one of two things. It was trying to do Sekiro, but easier, or it just didn't do a good job at making the skill-based parry combat work. For the longest time, I tried to give the game the benefit of the doubt that it was just trying to be easier to appeal to a wider audience so it doesn't alienate people with its difficulty. But about halfway through, I was convinced that the game just didn't do a good job at making a skill-based combat, when most of the time when I felt like I died or failed, it was more so the game's fault and not mine. And that sounds super whiny, because it is. I never was frustrated at myself for not recognizing a pattern of a boss or mistiming a block that could have saved my life. I was frustrated that the game didn't do what I wanted when it wanted me to do it. The very first thing I did after beating the game was pop in Sekiro and play around for a little while, and it was very apparent that Fallen Order was slow, unresponsive, and difficult because of the game's basic functionality. Perfect blocking in Sekiro felt good and had a distinctive feeling and sound that made the player know you're doing this right. Half of the time in Fallen Order, I was confused whether or not I was actually even blocking the hits until my health meter flashed red due to low health, and it was like, I was blocking that whole time! I heard someone say, this game feels like this because Cal is an unexperienced Jedi, and it made me feel that way too. That's a fantastic argument, but you wouldn't want to play a new Halo game where you play as a character who's only shot a gun a few times, and you never hit enemies because your character isn't good at shooting the gun yet. It doesn't make for a fun experience. The biggest problem of combat in the Fallen Order isn't a player problem, it's a fundamental flaw in the game's programming and design. I'm not saying they have to speed things up like Sekiro, which helps make Sekiro a little bit more difficult. They can still keep things slower so they can keep the difficulty mild, but the game just doesn't do what you want to do when you want to do it, which leads to frustration and overall a combat flow that doesn't feel rewarding. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the lightning round. There is still so much I could say about the combat, but I'm ready to move on. Though I have more complaints, so I'll list them off in 30 seconds or less. So, let's go! Nothing was more frustrating than when I was dying and I would hit the button to heal and Cal would say something and there would be a sound like I was healing, but I wouldn't heal and then I would die because it didn't heal me. Sometimes Cal wouldn't grab onto posts and he would just slide off and die. Why do you have to push L2 to grab onto the clearly obvious vines to climb on? It makes a big deal of defeating bosses, but you very rarely get any XP from defeating any enemies or bosses. Speaking of which, why are all the mini-bosses just tougher versions of the same giant creatures walking around the world? Why did Cal have to be fascinated by ponchos? Couldn't have been something so much cooler? Okay, that's it. I'm done complaining about the gameplay. The main idea is that it boils down to that it takes elements from other games and does a lot of it okay, but the things that it does wrong are fundamentally flawed. But it doesn't ruin the experience, it just makes it far more agonizing than it needs to be. It never feels rewarding in terms of exploring the world or defeating tougher enemies due to the game's fundamental flaws. One of the best things in this game are its graphics and environments. There are very awesome moments when I get caught up in checking out the scenery. It wasn't always beautiful landscapes, but just cool places to be. The ship junkyard at the very beginning had incredible viewpoints that were just fun to stay for a moment and take in the view. Kashyyyk had plenty of cool moments to catch your breath and enjoy the greenery around you. As you explore the worlds, there are plenty of touches of detail that added so much to the world. I loved the visuals of the game when they worked. Here we go again. I feel like I'm a very forgiving person when it comes to graphics and technical issues. I understand that there's a lot of elements that go into making a game, lots of moving parts and things that rely on other things to work. At first, when the technical issues arose, I was shrugging it off, like, oh, there's a lot of things to load, don't worry. Oh man, that person's falling in place, that's hilarious. Wow, that texture took a second to load, but whatever. But when it starts to become annoying or detrimental to story moments, that's when it starts to become a problem. This game was plastered with technical issues, and I only felt like it got worse as the game went on. By the end, there were cutscenes where a character would start talking and then suddenly appear on screen like a jump scare. Enemies were clipping into the environment and falling in place, and it was just making it so I couldn't see where they were sometimes. Pieces of the environment would load right before your very eyes. Characters would be missing pieces of clothing, and worst of all, I'd be walking around and the game would freeze and have to load for quite some time. Speaking of load times, try not to die because there's at least a 1-minute loading screen that awaits you. Like most of these problems, if it happens once or twice, it's pretty forgiving, but after about the 10th or more time it happens, it starts to get pretty annoying. Technical issues can hinder an experience, but here it almost ruined it for me. By the end, having the world load before me was to be expected, and I wasn't surprised when a character would randomly appear out of nowhere during a cutscene. It really looked sloppy and cheap. Darth Vader once said, "Life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're gonna get." It might not have been Darth Vader who said that, but someone famous did, and that's exactly how I would describe my experience with the Fallen Order. On the outside it looks interesting and awesome, but once you start diving in, you begin to find things you don't like, or pieces that could have been good, but were not. There were also parts that are really good and made you realize why you're eating an entire box of chocolates in the first place. The main characters are really what makes this game worth playing. Learning about Cal and Cere's experiences with the Force and being Jedi are the best moments in the game. The gameplay does have its moments that made it mostly enjoyable, but at its core it was unrewarding in exploration and at times just didn't even work in terms of the combat. It balanced a lot of elements, and like me trying to juggle in real life, it just dropped the ball more often than not. And none of this was helped by the fact that there were way too many technical issues to get comfortable in the worlds that I was exploring. Okay, I have complained a lot about this game, but if for nothing else, there were times when I did have fun. I'm glad this game exists because it gives a launch point to improve upon and continue Cal's story or introduce cool new characters to the Star Wars lore. There's lots of potential for non-Battlefront Star Wars games. This just missed the mark on several occasions and left me not looking forward to revisiting this game in particular anytime soon. But if any future sequels or other Star Wars games come out, I will be more than interested to try them. But for now, I think Fallen Order is a game where you can skip entirely or just pick up at a severely discounted price. I paid like $10 on the PlayStation Store, and I'm glad I only paid that much. Back to my chocolate metaphor, there would be times when it was just like, oh my gosh, yes, chocolate with salted caramel, my favorite, I loved that. And then you just get something and you're just like, what the f*** was that? That was disgusting and awful. And then you get something else good, and it's just this balance that never quite feels like you get comfortable playing this game, which I feel like severely hindered my experience and just was hard to really grip. In the end, I think if you're interested, try Fallen Order, but just keep a lot of these things in mind. It's not a perfect game by any means, and its story is really what you're here for. The gameplay is such a struggle most of the time, and the technical issues just make things unbearable at moments, but in the end, it's an experience that it's fine. It's really fine, and that's the best way to explain it. Hey, thank you so much for watching this episode of A Game for Your Thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about Star Wars Fallen Jedi Order. And while you're down there, if you want to hit like, subscribe, and the bell to get notified every time I post a new video, that would be awesome. And if you want to see more of me, there's plenty of other amazing videos on the channel. I got game reviews, and I've been working on my What's for Breakfast series, where I make a delicious breakfast and a sip of coffee and play some Doom. So come join me on there, and that comes out about every week or so. I don't have a consistent schedule, so I'm sorry. But thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and you guys have a great day, and don't forget that the key to success is succeeding, and we'll see you next time on A Game for Your Thoughts. Bye!